All right. Hello. Today and yesterday, I read The Commandant of Auschwitz, and this is actually the autobiography, or memoirs that were written by Rudolph Hess, who was the officer in charge of building Auschwitz and who oversaw the first mass extermination of prisoners there, of Jews there. When it was Jews, there were Gypsies as well. There were Russians. There were anybody who was anti-Nazi. But of course, one of their aims was the extermination of the Jews. Now, the back of this book says this book is filled with evil. It has no literary quality, and reading it is agony. Comments Primo Levi in his introduction. The author comes across as what he is: a coarse, stupid, arrogant, long-winded scoundrel, and yet it is one of the most instructive books ever published. Now, first of all, yes, obviously this guy did some hideous things, oversaw some hideous things, but he doesn't come across as a coarse, stupid, arrogant, long-winded scoundrel. But I can understand why Levi would say such a thing, because I mean the guy had a hand in wiping out 6 million Jews. So yeah, you'd understand why a person would see anybody involved in that as nothing but evil. But I think very few people are nothing but evil. I mean, the guy grew up in a strictly one of the interesting things about it. The guy grew up in a strictly Catholic family. His original profession was going to be being a priest, and then he realized that something he told the priest in confession had been told to his father. So he said, "Hang on a second, I've been betrayed here." Now, his first thing was going off and joining the army in the First World War, I think it was. I read it quite quickly, and there's a lot in it. The guy was obsessed with order. The guy was obsessed with following instructions. He thought all instructions should be followed. And apparently all of the letters that came to any of the officers in the SS or anybody of the Nazis, underneath Hitler's sort of letterhead, it said, the only thing that matters is orders. Yeah. So orders were above anything else. People who disobeyed orders, or people who didn't even disobey orders, but maybe a prisoner got away, they were executed. This guy oversaw the executions. Many of the people he executed were his friends, shot in the head, whatever, or shot in the back of the neck. And it is an interesting book. It's not easy to read. I mean, there's a photograph in here, for God's sake, that nearly brought tears to my eyes. And what they describe is horrendous. He, in a gas mask, oversaw the first mass extermination of Russian prisoners, and then the first mass extermination of the Jews. And a lot of the Jews who went into these gas chambers, they knew what was happening. A lot of them were lied to, and they didn't know what was happening. The children didn't know what was happening. I mean, it's horrific. It's awful. It's it's not an easy read. But one of the things that's instructive about this is it shows that how a person in a larger system can do things they don't want to do. I mean, this guy, he says, and maybe it was trying to make himself look good. Maybe I don't believe everything written in here was a lie. I'm sure if you ask Primo Levi or Levy, I'm sorry if I'm saying the name incorrectly, Levi, I say, because that's how I know the genes are pronounced Levi Strauss, right? I'm sure if you asked him, say, yeah, he had not an ounce of goodness in his body, he was pure evil, blah, blah, blah. He knew he'd get killed if he disobeyed orders, simple as that, and probably his family would get killed as well, because I guess it's like, the Nazis were like the Colombian drug cartels. You do what we tell you, and if you mess up, you're dead. But what's interesting about this is you see how things aren't always just black and white, because, I mean, they had a special group within the concentration camps who were Jews whose job it was to lie to the other Jews being taken into the gas chambers so they won't know they were being exterminated, or to help them get undressed and get ready for the... Could it be a lie? Yeah. Do I think it probably happened? Yeah. People will do anything to save their own skin. Simple as that. What else was there in here? He served in a lot of wars. Before the Second World War, he served in some wars. He shot some people. He killed some people, like all soldiers do. And I think that actually makes a person more humane, because you see what war actually is, what horror actually is. Whereas, here's an example. This is probably not a good example to talk about when talking about this, but it's an example that comes to mind at the moment. Ariel Sharon, once leader of Israel, everyone thought he was a hard man. He'd come down on them like a ton of bricks. He was a decorated soldier. He was actually a hero, a war hero, for what he'd done for Israel. I mean, if you look at it from the other side, then he was a war criminal, but that's another discussion. Compare him to Netanyahu. Netanyahu never served in any wars, and he's just basically a cold-blooded mass murderer who wants to wipe out all the Arabs. If he'd ever had to kill anybody himself, or he'd seen children dying in war, or anything like that, I'm sure he'd be a little bit more restrained. But, this is a good example of a guy who was probably a bit more restrained than the other officers he worked with in the SS who hadn't seen war. It's, all little kids can pretend to be superheroes who are going to kill each other with swords, but put a sword in their hand, they probably won't hurt a fly. Yeah, it takes something. This is a good book. It's not a pleasant book. I didn't actually choose it. This was sent to me to read by somebody. It's not a long book either. I mean, apparently it was only 115 pages when he'd finished reading it. At the end, there's a sort of confession, which is page 181, I think the end was. 181. Okay. It is because of this humane and blah, blah, blah. Let me... I don't want to read the end to you in case I spoil it. But, yeah. Final sentence, here we go. These writings consist of 114 pages. I have written them voluntarily and without compulsion. Good book. Read it. Interesting insight into history. Interesting insight into psychology as well, I think. Was he pure evil? I mean, one of the questions he was repeatedly asked was, could you have said no? Well, if he did, he wouldn't have written the book because he'd be dead, wouldn't he? Right? I mean, it's not an easy one to answer, but was he pure evil? I don't think anyone's pure evil. Did he take part in pure evil? Yes. The system you're involved in, the people who you follow. I mean, Hitler was just, he just wanted to wipe out the Jews, simple as that. So that was his aim, and that's what he was going to make his people do. And also, the people were vulnerable. They were coming out of the First World War when Germany was in a terrible state. When you take vulnerable people, it's easy to make them do stupid, crazy, murderous. Look at all the far right groups. They basically take losers and turn them, they make them, give them a sense of power. Or the extremist groups, whether they be ISIS, those motherfuckers, or whoever. They have to find people who are generally unsure of themselves, generally feeling beaten down, usually a little bit stupid. Sometimes you do get very, very intelligent people join these groups, but socially they're about as adept as a hand with no thumbs, so they're vulnerable. I give this book 8 out of 10. It's worth reading. I say that even though it took me a few attempts. A book this long I'd usually sit and read in one sitting. It took me several sittings over a couple of days. Good book. All right. Hope you enjoyed that.